Fly fishing isn't that hard, and I know it doesn't always feel that way, especially when you start out, but that's because a lot of beginners don't get into this sport with a good base of knowledge or expectations. You're bombarded with a library's worth of info, told that you need to know all of it, and good luck remembering it out on the water. So what are the things you actually need to know? What's going to make a difference for you, and what's just going to add to the noise? Well, I can't speak for everyone, but between my own experience starting out in fly fishing and all the beginners I've gotten to talk to at VFC over the last few years, these are the 5 things that I think if you remember them, they'll really make a difference in how you experience this sport.
This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Co.
Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durant, having more fun than a human being ought to be allowed, but someone's got to do it. It's so much fun to be here every week to do the show, and we're almost to episode 180 of Untangled, which is crazy to think about. So thank you guys for listening and letting me do this many shows, because it really is up to you guys. If y'all didn't like it, we wouldn't be here. So this is all completely thanks to you. So I really appreciate it. And I spent quite a bit of time this week as I was putting my notes together for this show and just thinking through how I wanted to talk about this, because I was really curious about what would me 20 years ago, what would I really wish that I knew when my dad took me out to the Spring Creek and he handed me a fly rod and he said, don't tangle it. And then he went upstream so he could fish in peace for a few minutes before I inevitably tangled it. So, it was just interesting to go back and think, like, what really would have made the difference? What would have moved the needle? And the 5 that I came up with, I came up with them independently, and then Alex and I were talking about it, just get his thoughts on it, make sure I put together a well-rounded show. And we actually realized that most of these things that I came up with are reflected fairly well in our fly fishing crash course video. It's actually a 2-part video. The first part is all like, here are the skills. Here's casting, reading water, picking a bug, fighting and landing fish. Here's all of these skills. Here's how to do it. And then part 2 is we took my mother-in-law who'd never fly fished before, and we taught her the crash course lessons, and then we fished with her to see if she could catch her first fish, very first day that she'd ever been out fishing. So that crash course, tons of fun to put together. And it was really interesting to me how so much of what I came up with was actually what was in the crash course that we'd already done. So if you really want to see that video and see some visual representation, what we're going to talk about today on the show, there's a link to take a look at that down in the show notes, just our fly fishing crash course. But let's dive right into it. And number 1, these aren't in order of importance, by the way. It's just in order that they kind of came to me. So it's not that number 1's more important than number 5. I think they're all equally important. But number 1 is you don't need to memorize the names of flies. And I've been getting this question a lot lately from folks who've sent it in as a question to the podcast. Folks in our school group have been asking this a lot. We've had just emails to the VFC email address just asking, like, how do I know which flies are which? What's the best way to do this? I'm not sure, because they want to know if they're out on the water and someone says, yeah, I caught these fish on a sparkle dun, or I caught these on a paragon. You know what they're talking about, and you don't have to ask. Although I will say, I do remember being in that exact situation as a young pup of an angler. And this guy told me, I think it was on like an RS2 or something. And he told me he'd caught a fish on an RS2. And I didn't hear him right. And I thought he said R2D2. And this is not copyright infringement, by the way, Disney. I know that you like to sue everybody for everything all the time. I'm just referencing pop culture, Disney. Okay, so chill. So I looked at him and I said, the R2D2? I don't know what that fly is. And he looks at me and just kind of shakes his head and says, no, RS2. And then it clicked. And then he showed me what it was. And then I've never forgotten what that fly is since then. So I would say also just don't be afraid to ask people either, because it's a great way to learn too. So I don't think someone's going to think you're an idiot or like, oh, I'm sharing the water with this guy and he doesn't even know what a bar's a merger. Somebody get him out of here. All right. We can't have riffraff like this on my river. There might be reactions like that in some places, but the vast majority of anglers are not going to act that way. So don't be afraid to ask them either. But I do understand that it feels weird to fish with stuff you don't know the names of it, right? I understand how that could feel intimidating and overwhelming and like you're not getting a full, clear picture. But you really don't need to memorize the names of flies right off the bat. That should not be one of your first things that you are worrying about as an angler. Familiarity with your flies is going to come with time. You're going to learn the names of the flies the more you fish. It will come, I promise. If you really, really want to learn them, get some flashcards. That might help, but it will come with time, okay? What really matters more is not that you know, oh, this is a sparkle nun and this is a WD-40, but what matters the most is that you're able to say, oh, the fish are eating this, and this is the fly that most closely matches what they're eating. I'm going to go ahead and tie that on. And you do that by utilizing the right fly formula, our little guide for picking the right fly here at VFC. All you need to know is you've got to look at what the fish are eating, and then you've got to match that based on the size, the shape, and the color. Those are the three most important things, and those are in order. So you want to get the right size of fly first. So if you get to the river and you see these bugs with these really tall upright wings and long tails, they almost look like a little sailboat on the water. You're going to want to match the size of that first. So you'll look in your box and find a fly that looks roughly the same size. Then you want to go for the shape. So then you're going to be looking for something that's got kind of that longer tail and not really a lot of wing on it, maybe just some up more around the head. And then if you can match size and shape, you find something that looks good, throw it out there. If you've got an exact color match, that's even better. But most of the time, the fish don't get super picky about color. It's just size and shape that you've really got to worry about. And if you want some help remembering that right fly formula, or you want some help remembering like what's a mayfly, what's a caddis, all that other stuff, we've actually got all of that in our VFC field guide right here. This little handy dandy, completely waterproof booklet that fits right in your fishing pack, and the right fly formula is like page 2. So it's right here. And these are completely free. Actually, we're just giving them out. We want everybody to be able to have the info that's in here. There's fly information, rig diagrams, lots of really good stuff. And we want you guys to have this so you can have a great time out on the water. Like I said, completely free. You just have to pay the shipping to get it to you. And there's a link to grab those down in the show notes or somewhere here on the screen. If you're watching the video podcast, you can grab your own field guide. But again, names of the flies are going to come with time. Don't worry about committing them to memory. Don't feel like you're less of an angler because you have a hard time remembering what the elk or caddis looks like from the parachute Adams. That's fine. It's going to come with time. Match what you see on the water. Focus on a good drift. And that's going to help you more than anything. And that really leads us into point number 2, which is where you fish matters way more than what fly you use. Okay. If you can match the hatch, if you can match what the fish are eating, if you can pick a fly that is a good example of what they're eating, that's very important. That is one of the most basic life skills, like knowing how to make a good buffalo sauce from scratch, or apparently knowing how to iron. I got roasted for that a while ago. Apparently people still iron. But those skills are important. You definitely need to have them. But it really doesn't matter if you are not putting those flies where the fish are. Okay, you can have the absolute perfect fly selection and you could you could have just nailed it, right? This is the best looking fly. This is absolutely perfect. But if you don't put it where the fish are, it doesn't matter. That's why I say all the time, and if you're new to the show, I promise you're going to hear this, but that's why I say all the time, your job as an angler is to put flies in front of fish and make them look real. Okay. Put them where the fish are and use a fly that looks like what they're eating. Those are your key skills. And yes, sometimes the fish are going to get super picky where you do need an exact fly. And no matter how well you present it, they're not going to eat it unless it's the exact perfect fly. That's extremely rare, though, in my experience. It's way more often comes down to, are you putting the fly where the fish need to be? Okay, let me give you an example of this for a minute. I just told this story recently on the pod, but I'm going to bring it back up again. I'm out fishing with my buddy Mysis Mike, the greatest blue-winged olive hatch I've ever been in my life. And the fish were kind of picky. They were very picky about the life cycle stage. So they wanted emergers, and then they wanted the duns, and then they wanted the spent wings or the spinners. So I was religiously kind of matching the hatch, and I was doing all right for myself. I was catching a few fish. But Mike, my buddy, he's a few hundred yards upstream from me, and he is catching more fish than I am by like a 10-1 margin. And he's doing it all with a Griffiths net that by the time we got done fishing was basically just 2 turns of thread on the hook is all that he was doing. But Mike really had that nailed down to where he was putting that fly right where the fish wanted it, right where they were eating. He was making it look as real as possible. So that's the important stuff that gets overlooked sometimes, especially as a beginner. And I remember feeling this way. We're going to the river and thinking, man, if I only had the magic fly that guy's using, I would do this all the time. I would watch people catch 4 or 5 fish in a row, and I'd go up to them and say, hey, do you mind me asking what fly you're using? And I don't think I ever had someone be mean to me at that point. They'd tell me, and then I'd think, oh, okay, that's the fly. And I put that fly on and think, I'm in business. I'm going to catch these fish. I'm going to show them who's boss. I'm going to be the freaking awesome angler that everybody looks up to. And then I just keep getting skunked because this lesson then sunk in that, yeah, fly pattern's important. Fly pattern matters. But where that fly is drifting and how it looks, that's way more important. Okay. So don't get overwhelmed by feeling like you don't have the right fly. There's no magic flies. We've talked about that a lot on the show as well. Focus way more on putting those flies where they should be. Now, point number 3, and this also kind of dovetails with point number 2, but something else I see beginners do, and oh my goodness, we want to talk about probably one of the things I was the absolute worst at as a beginner, and it was this. False casting is a waste of time. Okay. And false cast, just in case you don't know, they're all the extra casts that you make before you actually lay your flies down on the water. A lot of times we hear that if you're fishing with dry flies, you get to the end of your drift, you pick it up, and maybe you need to make 1 or 2 casts to get the distance to lay that fly down again, but maybe you throw in an extra cast or 2 to dry that fly off. Yeah, okay, we'll throw in an extra cast or 2, dry the fly off, and then lay it down. You know, max, they're looking at 4 or 5 casts that you've thrown to get your fly back down. I don't think that's unreasonable. What's unreasonable is when you're me and you're throwing like 20 casts before you lay your fly back down because you see people casting. You see people casting a lot. You see them casting frequently, and you think you need to do the same because, again, this ties into going into it without that baseline knowledge or expectations, and you're just told, yeah, casting's important, and then you watch everybody cast and you try to imitate that. Really, what it boils down to isn't that, right? You don't need to cast a bajillion times. You just need to get your flies to the fish. And even now, I still cast way too much sometimes. I will catch myself false casting way more than I should. But when that happens, there's this piece of advice. One of the best anglers I've ever known. He owned at least one fly shop, might have owned a couple at some point. Now he's a regional sales rep for one of the big companies in the industry. But he told me, one of the first bits of advice I ever got from him was, the best anglers in the world are the ones who can pick up and pick their lineup and get their flies to the fish in 3 casts or less. And for whatever reason, that's just stuck in my head ever since I heard that. And it's really been helpful to me because when I find myself false casting too much, I hear that in my head and I think, okay, calm down, just focus on, pick the line up, cast once or twice to get the distance, lay it down. And if you understand casting mechanics and you practice your casting, you can do that. You can absolutely do that, because I'll be the first one to admit I'm probably like an average caster. I'm not great, but I'm not terrible. I'm just right in the middle of the pack with everybody else. But I can pick my flies up and put them down within 3 casts most of the time. And that's made a huge difference as I've focused on that, because if you spend too much time false casting, you're setting yourself up for a lot of tangles. Okay. You're going to get tailing loops where your loop kind of collapses and you're moving the rod too quickly or too slowly. That's going to tangle up. It's just going to turn into a giant mess. And then some fish, especially during dry fly hatches, they are spooky enough if the water's low and clear, or if they're really pressured, that if your fly line whips over their head 5 or 6 times before your fly lands in front of them, that's going to spook them, and they're going to slink away and tell everybody, yeah, that Durant guy is back again, and he's casting like 8,000 times before he put that awful parachute in front of me. Don't eat his fly. No, Jimmy, no, I told you don't. No, okay, good. You didn't eat it. Thank you. You don't want that. You don't want the fish down there bad mouthing you, and you certainly don't want to be dealing with tangles instead of casting. So watch your false casts. I will say that I do think beginners false cast a lot because you're still trying to get the rhythm and the feel of casting down, and that's great. But I would urge you to just go practice that at a park. Don't really practice that out on the water, because that is when you can run into the tangles and spooking fish, and then you're really just frustrated. Practice your casting at the park, or if you're going to go to the river, if that's the closest place to you that you have to practice your casting, then don't tie a fly on and just work with that for a minute, so you're not at least tangling and losing flies potentially. But that is my big advice there for you. Now, point number 4 has to deal with all hooking, landing, and releasing fish, because all this other stuff's well and good. Okay, casting, get flies where they need to be, but what are you supposed to do with your hands when you actually hook a fish? They eat your fly. What are you supposed to do? Right? You get this huge surge of adrenaline, and then your mind goes blank. You think, oh crap, I don't know what to do. Well, there's a couple of things here. First things first, you want to make sure that your hook set when you're setting the hook for trout fishing. They come up and eat your dry fly, they eat your nymphs, whatever it is, other than streamers, which is a slightly different technique. But for nymphs and dry flies, you see the bobber move, you see the dry fly get eaten. You don't yank and pull and twist with your body. You don't have this big violent hook setting motion that you see in Bassmaster Classics or whatever. You don't need that. That is going to rip the fly out of the fish's mouth. Because we tend to fish with a little bit lighter line too, 4 or 5x tippet, you do run the risk of snapping a lot of that line as well. Instead, the best way to get a good, firm, solid hook set is just hold the line tight against the cork of your rod and then lift straight up firmly. You don't go super quick. Don't go super slow. Don't jerk it. Don't crack it like a whip. Just keep that line tight and lift. Drive that hook point home until you feel it bite into the fish. And then after that, you've got to go ahead and play the fish using rod angles or whatnot. That's something that really you'll develop your own style of fighting fish. Also, you're going to lose a lot of fish as well. That's just part of it, especially early on. So don't feel bad. Don't feel like you're doing something wrong. The big thing with fighting fish is you want to use some side pressure, and you want the bend of the rod to point in the direction that you want the fish to go. So if the fish is running upstream, you want to kind of bend your rod to the side and have that bend pointing back down towards you, towards the net, so you can get them in there. But that hook set, just make sure you're not jerking and moving your body too much. Okay. It really will help you a lot if you just focus on a nice tight connection and then keep pressure on during the entire fight. Don't lose tension on the line. The minute that you let any slack get into your fly line when you've hooked into a fish, you exponentially increase your chances of losing that fish. So don't let that happen. And then the other thing I'll tell you too here as well is when you're releasing the fish, you want to handle them as little as possible, especially trout. And then you want to get your hands wet before you touch them too. So trout have this protective layer of slime on them that protects them from disease and other things. So before you touch the fish, if you get your hands wet, you won't remove as much of that slime layer. If you just grab them with dry hands, you'll actually yank a lot of that slime layer off. And then make sure that as you're releasing them, you're working the hook out. You're not squeezing the fish to death. Don't lay them down on the banks. Don't lay them on the rock. Don't lay them in the grass for pictures or whatnot. You'll keep them in the water as much as you can. Keep them wet. And then just make sure that that you're handling the fish as little as possible and get them back in the water if you're choosing to release them. If you're going to eat them, keep your legal limit. Tip my hat to you and hope you have a great dinner. But if you're going to release them, make sure you're releasing them the right way so that they have a great chance of surviving and growing bigger. So you can catch them when they're that 25-incher at that point. And then point number 5, I'll tell you as well, don't be afraid to try other species. And this is the one that kind of deviates, I think, from a lot of the stuff we talk about. But a lot of fly fishing media centers all around trout. And I've talked about that before, where I think trout fishing is sort of the, and I'm not saying this in the condescending elitist way, but it is sort of the spiritual center of the sport. A lot of fly fishing's unique attributes just lends itself to being a beautiful, fun, challenging, frustrating, exciting, exhilarating way to fish for trout in a river. It's just, fly fishing's great at that. Not to say it's not great for other species either, but there's this poetry almost. Again, I'm not trying to get too highbrow, but there's just something about fly fishing for trout that is very attractive to a lot of folks. And so that's why so much of the focus is on fly fishing for trout, because there's just something about it where those two go hand in hand. That being said, trout aren't the only thing you can catch on a fly rod. You got bass, you got panfish, pike, muskie, saltwater fish. Those are all catchable on a fly rod, and they're tons of fun. We've talked about it a little bit, and we'll be talking about it in depth next week. But we had a little trip to Florida recently where I got to do a whole bunch of bass and saltwater stuff on the fly, and that was so much stinking fun. I had an absolute blast doing it. And I'm not telling you that you need to go out and your first fly fishing experience needs to be chasing permit, because that would be miserable to do to someone for their first time, because those are probably the toughest fish on the planet to catch on a fly rod. Permit, if not the toughest, they're one of the toughest. But I am telling you that if you're focused on trout, you're getting your butt kicked a little bit. You're starting to doubt your abilities. You're like, I don't know if I can do this. Can I really catch anything on a fly rod? Go to a pond that's got some sunfish in it, put a dry dropper rig on, and you're going to catch more bluegill than you know what to do with that way. Not to say that there's not an art to catching some of the bigger bluegill, but you put like a little Prince nymph or zebra midge or anything with a bead on it under a dry fly, and you can work on your casting. You can work on a little bit of presentation. You can work on hook sets. You can work on fighting fish. There's all these skills that you can work on with bluegill that are also going to translate to trout. Okay. And then it's a great confidence builder too, because then you see, oh, I actually can do this. I actually can catch fish on a fly rod. Gives you a little bit of a confidence boost when you go to the river, which it's generally a bit tougher to fish in rivers than lakes, I think, just because you've got so much movement, you've got so much more line management to worry about. I think lake fishing, it is harder to find the fish and harder to dial in where they are at. But I think river fishing presents a little bit more of a unique challenge just with all the line management, especially for first timers. So that's one thing you can do. You could also go to the bass pond. You could throw a clouse or minnow on, and then you could work on casting that and identifying structure, looking for the places bass like to hang out, practice strip setting on streamers. That's another way that you can kind of build some confidence and then go back to trout in the river. But really, it just comes back down to giving you confidence on the water. And I do think there's probably something to be said for focusing just on one thing. You want to catch trout in a river on a fly rod, and you're going to spend your time putting work into that. I don't think that's a bad idea. But I know, especially as a beginner, I would have loved some easier days on the water when I started, where they could have reinforced the idea that I actually can catch fish on a fly rod. That would have been really helpful to have early on, I think. So that's why I'm telling you, it could help. I don't know if it will, but also just don't limit yourself, okay? Because there's a lot more out there besides just trout. And this is coming from a guy I love trout fishing. Like, I live where I do in the middle of nowhere because the trout fishing is so good. And my wife was, when we were looking for houses, we were looking, and I'm like, no, that's too far from the mountains. That's too far from the river. That's too far from this or whatever. I love trout fishing, but all the other stuff is a blast too. So don't shortchange the experiences you can have on a fly rod either. So hopefully that helps. Hopefully y'all grab something in there that's going to stick with you, help you out. And if you got any other tips that you think beginners could really benefit from, definitely drop them in the comments. Let us know. We'd love to hear from you guys, and help folks out with some extra info as well. But that wraps up the opening portion of the show this week, and now it is time to dive into this episode's Q&A section. Every week here at Untangled, we spend half the show directly answering questions from listeners and viewers just like yourselves. And if you've got a fly fishing question that you would like answered, there's a link to send those in down in the show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. Ariel from California has got our first question, writes in and says, I'm one of those anglers who carried nothing smaller than a size 20 fly. Why? Because I'm so worried that using 6X isn't strong enough to hold that fish of a lifetime. I know the logic is wrong, but I have no confidence in that size tippet. I just can't imagine fishing and trying to bring in a 10-pounder or tangling into a fish with shoulders like Tyson. I know it's about technique, correct drag, proper technique of walking the fish through the fight, but that tippet is tiny to me. I want to fish down to a size 28. I know I'd catch more fish with a tiny buzzer. What do you suggest? Ariel, there's a lot to unpack here. Thanks for sending the question in. My first question is, why do you think that you would catch more fish with a tiny fly all the way down to a size 28? That's what really stood out to me. I understand not carrying anything smaller than a size 20 because you don't want to use smaller than 6X tippet for that. And when you do get below a 20, 6X is nice. You can get 5X through a size 22. 24, that's when it starts to get a little tricky. There are some hooks out there that are made with eyes a little bit bigger, so you can put like 4X through them, but it's a size like a 24, 26 hook. So that's an option as well. But I don't think I agree with that size 28 and you're going to catch more fish with a size 28 than you would a 20. Okay. Back when I used to fish tiny flies, I used to fish 28s, 30s, and 32s on a regular basis. That's all I fished. For a while, I went down that small fly rabbit hole, which I have no idea why I did that. I think there's just the challenge of it was appealing, and I like the novelty of it, but it wore off kind of quick after I broke off a bajillion big fish. But when I was doing that and fishing those tiny bugs on a consistent basis, I don't think that I caught more fish because of it. In fact, I'm almost positive that I caught fewer because I was specifically targeting the fish that were only sipping the tiniest dry flies on the water. So I made it harder on myself essentially to go out and do that. Again, I just don't think that it's necessary to use a 28 to catch a lot of fish. A little pushback there might be if you're nymphing a river sees tons of anglers, like a lot of the tailwaters along the Front Range in Colorado, or a lot of the tailwaters here in Utah. Those fish do eat a lot of tiny flies. They're really good at spotting the fake ones that us anglers tie. They've got a big food source of a lot of small flies as well. So that kind of creates this perfect storm of there's a lot of small flies for them to eat, and we harass them a ton so they know that, those are kind of fake, that they're very selective trout. And in places like that, I know guides like Pat Dorsey, for example. I don't know Pat personally, but I I see his stuff on Instagram. I'm aware of him professionally. He's consistently fishing midges in like that size 24, 26 range. But I would also say that Pat's fishery is kind of the exception and not the rule. And Pat's also built up a reputation for being the go-to guy for that. He's really good at fishing those tiny flies, and he's come up with so many awesome tiny midge patterns. He gets it. He understands it. He's very good at fishing that way. But the vast majority of guides that I've fished with on rivers anywhere from Alaska to Wyoming to, everywhere in between, almost always those guys are using slightly larger flies than a lot of the flies that anglers are using, who are just there on their own. And they're not as picky about the pattern. A lot of the guides that I run into, they care way more that their fly is going to last the whole day versus if it's a super good pattern, because when you're a guide, you're either tying or buying flies to supply your clients. So you want a fly that's easy to tie and lasts forever. That's your goal as a guide. So unless you're, I think this really just boils down to what we talked about earlier on the show, to be honest, where how and where you fish the flies matters so much more than the actual fly you're fishing. And size definitely matters. It's the most important thing in the right fly formula that we talk about, but it's rare to run into that fishery where you're not going to catch fish. You're not going to catch big fish. You're not going to catch any fish at all unless you've got a size 28 on. But that's a very rare fishery that you're going to run into where that is the rule, the law. If you don't do it this way, you are not catching fish, period, end of sentence. Okay. So unless you're in a place like that, I would tell you focus way more instead on getting a good drift with a size 20 or size 22. Make sure you're doing that as best you can. Don't worry about whether you're fishing down to a 28. And if you go down to a 28, you're going to need 7X too. So, I mean, that even your worries about 6X are compounded even more because you're going to need 7X on a 28 minimum, right? But if that's how you're set on fishing and you want to fish small flies, light tippets, I'm not knocking that at all. I'm just hoping to make it clear that you understand that it's not necessary, right? If that's how you are focused on fishing, that's what you want to do. You definitely want a rod that's got a nice, soft, forgiving tip section, because rods that have a very stiff tip section, they're not going to absorb the head shakes and the runs from fish, and that can snap your tippet easily. So a nice, softer tip section like you find on medium fast action fly rods is going to handle this sort of fishing better. And then your lighter weight rod's going to help out as well. I know some guys who used to fish the South Platte in Colorado, which is famous for its super tiny flies, but they always fished with bamboo rods too. So they could really fish that 7X and 6X tippet with a lot more confidence because bamboo is so soft that it absorbs all those head shakes and runs better that you can fish that lighter tippet on it with a bit more confidence. So if that's how you want to fish, make sure you've got the rod set up to do it. And then, yeah, you're right. Focus on proper fighting technique and get the fish in there. But I wouldn't worry so much about that. I would focus on great drifts with the flies you already have. But thank you very much for sending the question in. I appreciate it. Steven from Arizona has got our next question, writes in and says, my question is regarding soft hackle flies. I hear wonderful things about these flies, but have never found much success with them. I find myself fishing nymphs when I see no rising fish, and then switching to a dry fly when the fish starts showing more activity on the surface. I hear these flies are a guide's best kept secret to catching more fish, but I find myself having little to no luck when fishing them. To me, they are kind of a jack of all trades, master of none fly. What is your experience with fishing soft hackle flies, and do you find more success on a dry dropper rig, double nymph rig, or fishing it solo on the swing? Love your content and always live real life. Steven, I would posit that if you're hearing about it, it's not really a guide's best kept secret. It's actually a guide's sneaky way to try to get you to pay $4 or $5 or $6 per fly back at the fly shop for their special flies. A good little sales technique there for you. But in all seriousness, we've had a ton of questions lately about wet flies. So thanks for sending this in. I can get it answered. I just don't fish them. I don't do it. And I know some people are going to clutch their pearls over it and, get all upset. But before you leave a nasty comment, let me explain myself. I don't fish wet flies, but it's not because I hate them. It's not because there's anything wrong with it. It's not because it's not a quote unquote good way to fly fish. It's just not a method of fly fishing that I particularly enjoy. I've tried it. I've done it enough to know my way around it, but it's just not a way of fishing that scratches that itch for me. Kind of like with Euro nymphing. I spent the better part of 2 years really diving into that, and it was fun. I caught a lot of fish, but it didn't quite do it for me the way that dry flies and dry dropper rigs do. I love the visual aspect of it. I love fishing that way. Again, nothing wrong with the other ways that we fish. I just really like that stuff. So, I understand wet flies, soft hackles. They're a hugely historic part of fly fishing as well. They've got a lot of the nostalgia factor going for them because that's the oldest style of fly that we've got. But again, that's just not my personal cup of tea. So with that said, really, they're just designed to be swung in strips. So they're these flies that are tied with that nice big soft hackle. Instead of being stiff and riding up on the water, it kind of sinks. And then it gives the fly a lot of movement, a lot of lifelike flutter and movement in the water. And they're made to largely mimic emerging insects. That is the big skill that these flies have. They mimic emerging insects phenomenally. So that's what makes them different than other flies. It's just they're wrapped with usually some kind of partridge feather, and that's what kind of pulsates and flutters in the water. You see this design carrying over into Euro nymphs as well, with a lot of CDC collars, even just a lot of wet hackle or soft hackle collars on a lot of Euro nymphs now too, just to give them more movement and more make a little bit more noise in the water. The times that I've fished wet flies and had good luck with them have been when I've cast them upstream and then I let them swing down and across from me and then strip them back upstream a little bit before making another cast. And it's very simple. You just cast across the current, try and keep a tight line to it, follow the fly with your rod tip, and then let it swing out below you. And at some point during that drift, whether it's upstream of you or downstream on the swing, that action of that fly is going to trigger the fish to go ahead and eat. Because again, it looks like that emerging insect, and trout really love food that's moving away from them. So the way that fly moves through the water, it really just triggers that predatory response in a trout. And that's the way that I fish them, that I've had the most success doing. But what I like to do now, as far as when I'm fishing them now, is I actually just incorporate them into my dry dropper rigs. And like I mentioned earlier, I'll tie some of my nymphs. Like you'll see the Guide's Choice hare's ear. It's just a hare's ear with some soft hackle wrapped around it. Prince nymphs, they have that hackle that's made to pulsate in the water a little bit. You can add it to a lot of different things. The blowtorch, the Duracell, a lot of stuff like that are going to have some sort of soft hackle wrapped around them, whether it's CDC or Hungarian or partridge feathers. Again, it just gives that lifelike movement of the fly, lets them bounce and move through the water. The folks who I know who fish wet flies consistently and seem to have the most success doing that are tying just one or two of these on their fly line and then swinging them through the water. That seems like the most successful way. Again, the folks I know who do it are catching fish, and it's kind of nice because if the fish hook themselves because they just come up and eat it. If you try to actually set and lift the rod, set the hook and lift the rod when they eat on the swing, you can pull the fly out of the fish's mouth. So it's better to just let the fish hook themselves, and then you just land them and play them from there. So there is a lot less of a learning curve with casting and hook setting and mending and whatnot, because you want there to be a lot of movement and action on these flies. So it's a great way to start out and kind of get a feel for it from a beginner standpoint. And I definitely encourage everybody to give it a shot, because again, I know a lot of folks who love it, and that's like their preferred way to catch trout is on soft hackles. And I love it. That's awesome that they found something that they love that much. Again, it's just not my cup of tea. Alex doesn't really like it much, and no one else here at VSC is really on the soft hackle train. maybe that's my fault because I talk up dry flies so much. I don't know. but that's where we are with it. I also did an entire podcast on this topic as well. I'll link that in the show notes if you want to check that episode out and really dive into a lot more details. But hopefully that cleared some things up for you. Appreciate it. Pete from Vermont has our next question, writes in and says, love the podcast and listen to them every week. As we approach spring fishing here in the east, the rivers will be elevated for a while due to the snow melts from the mountains. I like to fish streamers in this type of water. My question is, when using a sink tip line, is it possible to swing it in these faster flows without stripping it in? I've tried this in slower, lower waters and it snags immediately. Can you strip slowly to stop the sinking while letting the line swing to keep the fly off the very bottom? Is that the technique needed, or is there another method? Here's to the VFC group, which I belong to since the beginning. Great group of anglers. Wings are a must, but with a good New England hazy IPA for me. No doubt, no Diet Coke. Sorry, Spencer. Pete, good question. Thanks for sending it in. And the short answer is yes. It's definitely possible to do it the way that you described. The long answer is you're kind of overthinking here things a little bit. So the whole point of swinging a streamer, which is what you mentioned, is you want to get that fly to cover a lot of water. It's passing through a lot of water, and you want it to happen in a relatively lifelike way in the hopes that it triggers a predatory or aggressive strike from a fish. Okay, that swinging motion, again, fish like food that's moving away from them, so that swinging motion is great for triggering those predatory instincts. But that's the whole goal of swinging the fly. Cover a lot of water, trigger the fish, add some lifelike movement. So within the whole idea of swinging flies, there's a lot of ways to go about doing it. But again, your goal is to get that predatory or aggressive strike from the fish. So adding some lifelike movement is going to be a great way to help accomplish that. So my question to you would be, is stripping or bouncing the fly during the swing an effective way to add lifelike movement? And if the answer to that is yes, then go ahead and do it, right? It's one of those things where, okay, is this going to make the presentation look better or worse? Better? Okay, I'm going to do it. Worse? I'm not going to do it. It really is that simple of, you ask about, technique and stuff. Well, think through walk through the whole thing, point A to point B, and what's this going to do to the presentation? Try and visualize it, because then, developing this skill, not only does it help you there in this instance, but it also helps you troubleshoot a bunch of different things you might run into on the water. So there's a lot to be said for being able to visualize what you think will happen. Then you go try it and you see if it actually happens the way that you're expecting it to. As far as not getting snagged up on the bottom, if you're swinging streamers through water that's too shallow or too slow, you're going to get hung up no matter what. There's just no way around that. So stripping the streamer slightly, just keep it up off of the bank or the riverbed. 100%, that's fine. But if you're consistently getting snagged, then you're probably in the wrong kind of water to be swinging streamers anyways. At that point, I would fish that water by throwing the streamer upstream and then just stripping it back down to me at about a 45-degree angle. Now, as far as the actual technique needed with this style of fishing, this idea really got reinforced to me on this Florida trip that I mentioned earlier, that again, Alex and I are going into detail on that next week, so stay tuned. But we were out fishing for bass in Florida, and Alex and I both have slightly different methods and habits for how we strip line in when we're fishing with streamers. And what I thought was really interesting was that I was stripping my flies one way. Alex was stripping his flies another way. Different, longer pauses, shorter strips, longer strips. They weren't a carbon copy of each other. And we were fairly neck and neck for fishing on the entire trip, where we caught roughly the same amount of fish, even though we're using slightly different retrieval styles, slightly different techniques to get our flies where we need to be. We would ask, I'd ask Alex, how quickly are you stripping? How deep are you going? If I hit a lull and he was catching, see, do I maybe need to tweak something? But other than that, we weren't fishing exactly the same. It wasn't this robotic, I'm doing it the exact same way Alex is. So where I'm trying to go with this is that we focused on getting our flies in front of fish instead of worrying about am I doing this right? Is it the best way to do it? Is it effective? Can I do it this way? Like, none of that crosses our minds. It's just put these flies in front of the fish. And that's half the battle, especially with trout, if you just get it in front of them, right? So when you have questions about techniques like this, when you're wondering like, okay, is this actually going to work or not? Step back, ask yourself, okay, is what I'm doing going to prohibit my ability to get flies in front of fish? If it is, I'm going to stop. If it's not, I'm going to keep doing it. And it ties back to what I mentioned earlier, where the ability to kind of troubleshoot this on your own, super useful skill to develop. And then you don't run into that paralysis by analysis where you're like, where you don't feel maybe comfortable, with this technique 'cause you've never done it. Again, just run through what do you want your flies to do, then try and make them do that. So hopefully that answers your question, but I appreciate you sending it in, man. Thank you. And with that said, we are going to wrap up the Q&A section of this episode. And like always, we're going to end with the live real life moment. Because every week here at Untangled, we end the show by sharing a story and a picture from folks out in the VFC audience who are living real life. We love to see what y'all are up to and to get to be a small part of the adventures you're having. So if you've got a live real life moment that you would like to share, there's a link to send those in down in these show notes or right here on the screen if you're watching the video podcast. And this week's live real life moment is from Josh, who writes in and says, "Hey, Spencer and everyone else at VFC. This Memorial Day weekend, I had the pleasure of heading out to one of the better tailwaters in my home state of Oregon. While there, my buddy and I got into one of the best caddis/midge hatches I've ever seen. Fortunately for me, I had just listened to the new caddis episode of the podcast and was able to put what I learned to the test. On day 3 of our trip, I put on a size 14 hotspot elk hair caddis with a size 20 zebra midge dropper. Dropped into this riffle and watched the caddis drain, and boom, I was on the biggest trout I've ever landed on the fly. It ripped through the riffles, through the tail out, and into the next hole. I called for my buddy, and he was running down the bank and got there just in time to scoop up this beautiful red band trout right as the hook popped out. Thankful for the team at VFC for putting out amazing content that we can all learn from and apply to our fishing. Keep up the great work, you guys. Now time to celebrate with some wings and a Diet Coke." Hey, you know what, Josh? Yeah, I'll raise a Diet Coke to that, man. That's awesome. I love it. Getting to share that with your buddies, tons of fun, isn't it, man? Wonderful story. Thanks for sending it in. And with that, folks, we're going to wrap things up this week. Thank you guys so much for being here every week. Thanks for listening to the show. Thanks for telling people about it. Make sure you rate and subscribe to the show wherever you're listening to it. That helps us reach more people, helps us help them live real life, which is the whole reason VFC and Untangled exists in the first place. And speaking of that, it's time to turn off the podcast. I'll quit yammering, but get out on the water, enjoy yourselves, and until next time, live real life.